Good morning. It's 4 minutes after 10. I hope you had a nice weekend. Football was all right, wasn't it? Flipping heck. Talk about that a little later, I think. Every now and then a story comes along that we have to talk about. And I think it's important to talk about. I think it helps. I think sometimes the temptation to look away from the unthinkable is almost irresistible. But we won't, because, well, we spend most of our mornings together now. And sometimes I think there's almost a sense of discussing it, articulating it, just dilutes some of the horror rather than contemplating it alone or letting these vile crimes filter through your own thoughts unaccompanied or uncommentated on. But when that happens, when these stories come along that we're almost compelled to talk about, I don't necessarily have a great deal to say. I don't have anything to add or any particular insights to bring to the conversation. I just, like you, sometimes feel the need to talk about it, to air it. They call it a talking cure, do they, in some circumstances, or is that something a little bit different? I'm interested in cover-ups and concerns. I'm interested in the timeline that is frankly astonishing, but I'm also interested in. I mean, understanding seems like an inappropriate word at the moment, but. Listen, I think what we're probably going to end up doing is asking doctors and nurses to tell us how you think this could have happened. Because I look at the detail and there's almost a tipping point in about sort of February, March of 2016, where you sort of wonder how on earth Lucy Letby was allowed to continue doing what she was doing. But it's not, I don't think, helpful to conclude that everybody involved in that chain of command and everybody involved in that decision-making process is in any way complicit. I think that there's something called sort of reputation protection. Now, I've seen it kick in the strangest of places. I've seen it kick in schools. You've seen it kick in schools, in businesses, in offices, in Hollywood studios. Something happens and it's almost as if the wagons start circling. And the priority, very wrongly, very, very wrongly, the priority automatically becomes protecting the institution, protecting ourselves. So on the one hand, you've got that going on. And I would need a little help in understanding why a hospital management is to be more likely, apparently, to be committed to that reputation protection process than it would appear consultant paediatricians who were sounding alarms and blowing whistles really on a fairly unbelievable level, given what actually and eventually transpired. So but because what happens is I say to you, oh, there's something I think. But we can't have the police in the hospital. We cannot have the police in the hospital. We can't have the police stalking. Imagine what it will do. And not just on PR. Imagine how the parents will feel. You can't have police stomping through paediatric wards in their size 12s. Do you see what I mean? That push. It's almost as if it happens at work occasionally when you forget what's going on outside of your own tiny little orbit. This will sound like an odd analogy, but when we got thrown out of school, we'd forgotten about the law of the land. We were only concerned about school rules. It was as if our universe, our moral universe, had shrunk to the environment that we were in. So if someone came up to you and said, I think Lucy Letby might be killing babies, I think your first reaction would be, no way. No, just no way. And then, the idea, in fact, one of the earliest whistleblowers recalls saying himself, it can't be nice, Lucy. Which is kind of what I was alluding to a little clumsily a moment ago when I talked about how ordinary she looks. I mean, there is no relationship between physical appearance and moral worth or moral value. But I think, we all suffer a little bit from that almost Disney-fied notion of goodies and baddies, don't we? And evil and good. But I get that line's the one that haunted me this weekend whenever I found myself talking about it. It can't be nice, Lucy. But it's not even as if she's been accused of hurting. She's being accused of killing babies. I don't know that anybody anywhere would automatically think to themselves, that's it. And then, I don't know why, but I'm interested in this psychological process. Once you've started from that position, it must be very hard to climb down again. So that was in June 2015 when 3 babies died in 2 weeks in the neonatal unit at the Countess of Chester Hospital. So this is anomalous. Doctors look at a review and all they really identify is the fact that Lucy Letby was on shift at the time of the infants' deaths, all 3 infants' deaths. But it didn't cross anybody's mind that the deaths might be linked. And indeed, Stephen Breary, the lead consultant at the unit, remembers actually saying it can't be nice Lucy. But there's an it. What can't be nice Lucy? There's already a sense of something going on, something anomalous. It could be equipment. It could be anything, frankly. And then June, July, August, September, just 4 months later in October, he contacts the sort of head of management again, the unit, or the manager of the unit, and says this can't be right. 2 more babies have died while she was on duty, and he suggests that there might be a link. The unit manager described it as unfortunate. Now, I completely understand why there is a desire to compel witnesses to give evidence. I kind of agree with it. I'm afraid I don't have the qualifications to comment on the difference between a statutory inquiry or a judge-led inquiry and the one that the government is currently minded to pursue. I think the speed with which conclusions are reached is a factor, and apparently the one they're doing will be quicker than the one that some people want. I don't know that the Labour politician who was talking to Tom earlier was qualified really to comment on it either. Judging by her comments, I could be doing her a grave disservice. I don't fully understand the difference, but compelling people to give evidence, it may have more to do with our feelings than the likelihood of it throwing up new facts. You want these people who said, oh, no, to be in the dock almost, or at least in the witness box. But what would you say? Someone said to you, I think she's killing babies. And I just don't think it's that incredible that the initial reaction from some people is, well, we know. The unit manager said it's unfortunate, this link, as in an unfortunate coincidence, while another consultant in charge of the children's ward said that doctors were told not to make a fuss. So they can't go there. This is what I find interesting, and love's not quite the right word, but I would relish the opportunity to hear from doctors about this particular dichotomy, because it seems to me this is where the stories lead. That why would doctors be more ready to believe that a nurse was killing babies than managers and, well, in this case, the chief nurse? Why would the consultant paediatricians, as long ago as October 2015, be, I'm going to say, contemplating the unthinkable? Because by the time she was taken off duty, a year after the first deaths, there were 7 consultant paediatricians calling for her to be taken off duty. I mean, that's incredible. That tipping point when 2 of 3 premature triplets died within 24 hours saw Stephen Breary call the Karen Rees, the duty manager, urging her to take Letby off duty. And Rees refused. So what is it? Is it a refusal to contemplate the possibility? Or an inability to contemplate the possibility? Listen, I'm not being glib, and I know we don't work in nurses and hospitals, but if someone came up to you and accused a colleague of a heinous crime, I'm not going to cheapen the conversation by speculating on what that crime might be, and the colleague was, to all intents and purposes, completely innocuous, completely ordinary, completely unremarkable, I think most of us would go, nah, come off it. And then you take it upstairs and you're like, no, look, I mean, coincidences happen. She's a full-time nurse. The odds of her being on duty are quite high, but every single one, the only one who's been on duty forever, yeah, come off it. There's no way she's killing babies. No way. And then you get this quite astonishing exchange with the duty manager when Stephen Breary says, I challenged her, I said, are you saying that you're making this decision against the wishes of 7 consultant paediatricians? And she said yes. Breary said he asked Rees if she would take, quote, responsibility for anything that might happen tomorrow to any other baby. And she is said to have replied, yes. And then a baby collapsed on Letby's shift that day. The nurse was called into a meeting and told for the first time of her link to the deaths in the unit. That's a year since the first 3 deaths were recorded. And she was then placed under supervision. But I still don't think anyone quite believed it, because in July she was moved to a clerical role. So she's still working in the office. She's still going out for drinks with nurses. And everyone is apparently happy to drink with her. So I because the verdict dropped on Friday and because the case has been before the court for so long, I'm comfortable going down this path of conversation and contemplation. I don't know what else we do, actually, except possibly pontificate upon the nature and existence of evil. But what really interests me is how that happened. That year-long process there of a growing number of doctors voicing growing concern, going to a place that is almost impossible to imagine, where you are looking at a colleague and thinking, that person is killing babies. That person is killing. I think what I'm saying is that on a very personal level, I think I would find it easier to believe that she wasn't than that she was. And that is what I suspect is at the heart of this process here. But I'm not a Jobsworth, and I haven't accommodated that push to reputation protection, that immediate, almost innate sense. Again, it would be glib to say that, when people move into management, they change. But when you become, you think that you're personally responsible for reputation protection, whereas consultants are a little bit more independent-minded, perhaps. I genuinely don't know. That's why I'm delighted or lucky that so many doctors will be listening today. But and of course, the clerical role she had was in patient safety, so she'd have access to some of the paperwork that was linked to some of the crimes that she's now been found guilty of. Which again suggests that even after she'd been moved, you have a phalanx of consultant paediatricians convinced that she's killing babies. And then you have all her other colleagues and managers and superiors who still don't think she is, even after she's been moved off the ward. And that's the bit that I am really interested in unpicking a little today, if we can. How did this happen? How do you have a situation, knowing what you know about how hospitals are run or about how the NHS operates, or knowing what you know about people, how do you have a situation where these warnings with grounds for concern, I mean, I think we could call it evidence now, are so completely ignored that even when they're acted on in such a half-hearted fashion that it's clear nobody actually believes the concerns of the people whose concerns have been acted on. It's astonishing. It's astonishing because, no one's ever going to know the numbers, but some colleagues were convinced she was killing babies, and at the same time, other colleagues found that suggestion to be utterly, utterly absurd. So how does it happen? Hit the numbers now. You will get through. 0345 6060 973. What do you think? I mean, some things we can't make sense of, right? I think it's important to acknowledge that from the start. Every day we get together, we sit down, we have a cup of tea, and we try and make sense of things that are confusing or complicated, almost every day. Some things we'll never make sense of. Maybe we won't make sense of this, but this is human behavior. This is not something that's happened to an alien species in a on a planet far, far away. This is something that has happened in the most banal of contexts. It's happened in a place of work, and the stakes are inconceivably high. But how do you account for the year between or at least the 9 months between somebody joining the dots and somebody taking action. That for me is the crazy bit. And I think a large part of the answer to that question will be, if I said to you, you have two choices, right? Here is a colleague, an incredibly ordinary colleague, a nice colleague, according to the man who first blew the whistle. Here's a colleague. You've got two choices. It's a binary choice. You either believe she's a baby killer or you don't. 0345 6060 973. It is 22 minutes after 10 and you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where really just the cover-up's not quite the right word. In fact, it's definitely not the right word. In fact, it's probably libelous. But the failure stroke refusal to even think for a minute that Lucy Letby might have been doing the things she was doing, despite the increasing conviction among consultant paediatricians that she was. I'd just like to come to a slightly better understanding of that. And one of the main reasons is because I'm not sure this is a situation from which lessons can be learned. I think it's so outlandish and so, I hope, and so extraordinary that lessons can be learned might be a bit trite. But then again, doctors coming forward with concerns about nurses might not be extraordinary at all. Josh is in Coventry. Josh, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Thank you for having me on.
You're very welcome.
So I'll be very honest with you, having worked in the NHS for close to 20 years now as a doctor. So sadly, doctors, particularly junior doctors, are treated almost like second-class citizens in hospitals. And whilst the vast majority of nurses work very nicely alongside doctors, and I'll be very frank and honest with you, there are a small proportion of nurses who genuinely dislike doctors. And it's almost as if nurses go out of their way to, these small proportion of them go out of their way to make our lives difficult. And the problem is they're protected in multiple layers by their managers and so on. And I want to give you two examples just to illustrate my point from my experience. So one example was about 11 years ago, not in the city in which I live. It was a different city. It's quite a famous hospital, and I won't take the name of the hospital, but a patient came in. They had a clot in their leg, and so I had asked the nurse on shift just to give them some blood thinning injections to prevent the blood clot from spreading or getting worse. I came back about 7 or 8 hours later. The patient was deteriorating and it looked like the blood clot had traveled up to their lung. And when looking into what had happened, one of the things that I found was that the nurse who I had requested to give the blood thinning injection never gave it. And when I asked why, she said, well, I'm not going to weigh the patient. If you want the patient to have the injection, you should have weighed them yourself, which isn't our responsibility. It's the responsibility of the nurse on shift. When I raised that as a concern, within 24 hours, the head of service, so the consultant who was in charge of the acute medical department, came and literally grabbed me by my shirt and dragged me to his office and berated and shouted at me for 30 minutes.
I'm sorry for what you went through. What systemic flaw do you think you're pointing at?
The fact that he said, in his words, the systemic flaw is, do not put in a concern about a nurse. How dare you? That's the systemic flaw. That concerns against nurses are never taken seriously, and it's almost as if we are treated as if we're doing things vindictively as opposed to constructively. And I think that's the problem. It's the mindset.
The management positions on a ward, rather than right at the sort of top of the trusts, the management positions, when I read about ward managers and duty managers, those are more likely to be nurses. Those people have come through the nursing side of things.
So ward managers, yes. So ward managers. So
if there's an us and them, if there is an us and them mentality between junior doctors and nurses, although it was a consultant paediatrician who was complaining in this this instance, you think that there's a sort of circling of the wagons and doctors will stick up for doctors and nurses will stick up for nurses?
I don't think doctors will stick up for doctors, but I think nurses will stick up for nurses. With the second example that I had, it's a very brief point.
With the greatest of respect, is it another grievance from your own career?
No,
Okay.
it's just an example of something. So it's attending a morning pre-brief where the ward manager, who is a nurse, tells everyone that, the most dangerous people in this hospital are doctors, so do everything in your power to stop them from causing harm.
Right.
Every morning on a pre-brief, I think kind of illustrates the mindset that sometimes exists within hospitals.
This is one manager that you encountered in your career who said
Exactly.
that. It's not, right. It's not sort of standard practice. Well, and again, if you complained about them, you think you would have been the one that got told off.
I was.
Well, this is obviously something that is worthy of further exploration with other doctors and nurses. Thank you, Josh. I feel for you. I really do. That sounds grim, and possibly adds to the air of understanding of how, when a consultant comes forward with concerns, duty managers and nursing managers push back defensively. To be fair, Josh's example is a lot easier to get your head around. More, it seems to me, incompetence than malice on the part of that nurse. Incompetence and then perhaps a little bit of stroppiness. But if someone told you that colleague over there was killing babies, I think the massive majority of us would need a heck of a lot of convincing. I'll clarify one thing. This text came in. I completely disagree, James, with your point surrounding most people not believing their colleagues could be capable of a heinous crime. I disagree in the sense that in an office I could see how that might happen. But Lucy Letby was in a position where she was supposed to be caring for vulnerable babies. In her profession, if a whistle is blown on you for something of that nature, it must be investigated immediately. We're not talking about someone funneling money elsewhere or stealing from their colleagues' lockers. No, you're absolutely right. I think what informed my observation was the statement by the consultant paediatrician, the lead consultant at the unit, who first called a meeting with the hospital's chief nurse about this, and himself recalls saying, "It can't be nice, Lucy." So I was more reflecting upon his comments in the context of other people's workplaces than suggesting that the workplace is unique. It was him that said it, the lead consultant. Rose is in Haywards Heath. Rose, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello,
Good to talk to you.
Likewise.
It's a difficult situation. It's just awful what's happened.
Yes.
The situation. I am a nurse, and I used to work in a neonatal unit many years ago.
Gosh.
And I was lucky enough in my profession to work for the regulator and actually do quality surveillance of
Other
hospitals.
nurses. Right.
Yes, well,
Okay.
of hospitals and
general.
teams. Yeah, and teams, and be looking at the data. So the consultants, you said earlier, how would they have come to this? They would have been looking at the data. They would have been looking to see what could have happened, and sort of almost going through and sort of getting rid of things. Could it be equipment? Could it be what could it be?
Yes.
And these things have to be reported up. But the point I made to your producer was that these things take time to be reported up. So they'd be first reported at a departmental level, then it would go to then it would go up and up the chain. So that would take a while, because you were saying earlier that how come it took a year to get her off the unit, and that's because it's bureaucracy. It would go through this, and people may have had their suspicions, and there's confidentiality and there's management, how you manage people. But I think to sort of why couldn't people believe that is that and sort of your former caller talking about the sort of like professional inter-rivalries,
yes.
is that you have to have a place, you have to have a safe space so people can raise those concerns, so they can say what they're thinking and what they're feeling without fear. And it appears to me that it became quite adversarial quite quickly.
It looks that way, doesn't it? So how much of that, given your particular experience, how much of that would you think might be specific to the individuals in situ in this case, and how much of it is actually, albeit the stakes are rarely quite this high and the consequences quite this awful, but actually the systemic structures or the systemic reasons for what happened could be replicated elsewhere? How much of this do you think is unique to the Countess of Chester Hospital between June 2015 and June 2016, and how much of it could be described perhaps as part of a broader malaise across the NHS?
I think the systemic thing is that sort of it's almost by management by committee. Things have to go through a process, and if you are called to account for it, you have to demonstrate the process that you went through to come to that particular conclusion. I noted in the coverage over the weekend that there had been two sort of like reviews of what had happened, but they weren't involving the police, and they weren't looking for a killer.
What would you have done if you'd been? I don't think if a consultant paediatrician came up to you and said, "I think that nurse over there is killing babies," what would you have done?
I have been in a situation when I was a junior nurse where I was working somewhere and a number of babies died, and they actually shut the unit to do sort of a root cause analysis to find to find out if they could find what the cause was. And
because the numbers, I've seen the comparisons on what you might expect on a neonatal ward and what was actually happening, and it does seem remarkable that we didn't get the response that you experienced at the beginning of your career.
Yeah, that's right.
I suppose cuts will be part of it. You can't shut a ward now because where would everybody go?
Yeah, and you're also that to be fair to the trust involved, everyone's under a lot of scrutiny. You can't shut a neonatal unit because where would the children go?
Oh yes,
and especially if they've got a maternity department, so they'll be under a lot of pressure to keep things going.
So we can't go there. My job is to get babies through the unit, and if I close the unit, then I will be doing the opposite of my job, would be the thinking in a situation where it isn't just a case of they can go to the hospital up the road or they can go to a different neonatal ward. Rose, you've made me very late for the news, which is a compliment to the quality of your contribution, so thank you so much. I hope we talk again on happier subjects. But Thomas Watts is here now with your headlines. 10:37 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Michelle suggests that what I am describing might be the halo effect, a cognitive bias in psychology where one specific trait influences judgment of other traits. Lucy couldn't be a murderer because she is a woman or sociable or competent or ordinary or nice, as the consultant who did first make the link between her being on shift and babies dying originally concluded. It can't be nice Lucy. I think more for me the uniform. I know I commented on how ordinary she looks, but I don't know really what I mean by that. I mean the uniform, a nurse. It's getting your head around the idea of a nurse doing harm. A direct contradiction of the first line of the Hippocratic Oath. It's that, isn't it? That is. I don't know if that is a halo effect, whether or not someone choosing to go into the NHS should automatically be presumed to be of better stuff than many of us, but I don't know. I don't know that I want to let one truly rotten apple like this colour my view of anybody else. Jay's in Cardiff. Jay, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello,
I'm a
Jay.
first-time caller. Been listening for a long time.
Thank you.
But today was the first time I felt really compelled to call in because I feel that I was just bringing up the conversation about how unassuming or ordinary Lucy looked. It's something that I've been hearing since the conviction was passed on Friday, and I find it really, really difficult actually. So I'm a British Pakistani GP that was born in Manchester, brought up there, and recently moved to Cardiff. But for me, I just find it really, really difficult with this unassuming description because, as you know, lots of people have described, Lucy was, a young woman.
Yes.
She was, born to middle-class parents, was educated in the UK, is, what you would consider to be the perfect neonatal nurse. The photographs of
I see what you mean, yes.
Photographs with babies, have all been sort of what you would assume a neonatal nurse would look like looking after babies. But from my point of view, like I said, born to immigrant grandparents. Parents were spent most of their life in the UK, and I was educated here as a GP. But if it was my face on the newspaper today, how would I be more assuming than Lucy? And I feel that, as you can hear, I have a very northern accent. I was born in Manchester and brought up there. And if you ask most people who are my friends or my family, I'm the most northern girl they know. So very much in the same way that Lucy's as British as they come. And to me, it feels like if it was my face, a British Pakistani hijab-wearing GP that had committed such a horrible crime, I would have been considered far more assuming than Lucy. And I don't want to just just look at it from that angle, because I don't believe that, I don't believe that if it was myself or anybody else, or person of colour, or anybody even slightly different to Lucy, would have been considered more assuming than Lucy did. And I find it's just a bit of an unhelpful description.
I think you're right. I think you're right. Listen.
Thank you.
No, I shouldn't say listen. You haven't finished talking. Carry on, if you want.
I was just going to say that, it feels like, it feels like a bit of a sort of stab in the back, really, to all the years that I've spent educating and, being a member of British society and wanting to help people. If it was my face on the news today, how I would be considered far more likely to have done it than Lucy could have.
The tone of the coverage would be different. I think you're absolutely right. Listen, all I can say to you is that on this show, as I hope you realise, having listened to it for a while, then that the conversation would be exactly the same. The conversation would not be in any way coloured by colour. But Melanie texted just before you came on, actually, to say there is a race element to this. She was believed because she is a young white woman. Look at the reporting yesterday in the Mail. She didn't even get removed from the register until yesterday. When you compare this to complaints made against non-white nurses for much less serious issues, you will find a huge difference.
Yeah, I don't want to make a direct comparison because the cases were very different, but just as an example, the case of Dr. Hadiza Balagaba was another one that resonated with me, because whilst she was accused of negligence and that was investigated, in the end she was found to have been innocent.
Yes.
However, the coverage of that was absolutely appalling compared to some of the coverage that we've seen for the Lucy Letby case. But actually, if you look now, Hadiza Balagaba's reputation is absolutely tarnished, as is probably her career prospect. And this was just somebody who was, yes, accused or yes, investigated, but actually found to have not done anything wrong in that situation, and there were systemic failings. And the fact that even systemic failings has been something that has sort of been used as an excuse for Lucy Letby, again, those same excuses were brushed to aside in that case. And like I said, I don't want to make a direct comparison with that case because it isn't the same, but my feeling is in the way that it's been described all of this weekend, I found it quite upsetting.
I get that. I think Hadiza Balagaba was found guilty and then it was overturned on appeal, wasn't it?
Yeah, but
no, your point stands. I'm just clarifying it for people who won't be aware of either the case or the person that you're talking about. Jack Adcock, a 6-year-old child, and died later that day in part because of failings in his treatment. So, I mean, you're right to remind us that they weren't similar at all. I can't really argue with a single syllable of what you've said, and in some ways I'm part of the problem that you describe, albeit that I don't think I'm guilty of the actual prejudice that you describe. But looking at the coverage, you know that if she had been foreign-born, or I mean, even foreign-born, because, you get that. I forget the case, but trained in Germany and born in Nigeria and came here, and they go through the story, they go through the details in very, very different ways. Different ways from how they do when it is someone who looks... Well, that's why we have the phrase girl next door, isn't it?
Exactly. I actually heard it described on one channel as an English rose, and I found that really offensive. Because it's, yes, I believe that's a description that a lot of people use about a young, young woman who is a neonatal nurse. Of course, like in many situations, that might be considered an English rose. But in this situation where she's been convicted of murdering children, why are we still using descriptions like that as almost a whitewashing of it, or
it's a great
an
point.
English washing of it?
I think I can answer your question, actually, and I don't know if it will be a comfort to you or whether it will add to your sort of sense of injustice, but I mean, we live, of course, in an increasingly diverse population, but that doesn't mean everybody does. So certainly speaking about newspapers and speaking about, if you like, middle-class enclaves, it's more about seeing somebody who you are familiar with, So if you live in an area where there are not many people of colour, or you lead your life in such a way that you don't come across many people who aren't like you, the shock of the familiar is very different from the threat of the other. And so that's a psychological inevitability, but it doesn't detract from the unfairness of the picture you've painted. Unconscious bias.
I think the last thing I'd like to say is that I feel like a lot of the photographs used in any coverage as well there's been very few where I've seen that the very first picture is her mugshot of the woman that has been convicted of murdering babies. There's been lots of photographs of her smiling, holding babies in her uniform. And I think that's added to this image of, how could she have done this? Which I think is a fair question. It's not a problem to have that conversation. I think it's good that people are having that conversation. How did she go undetected? Or, and even when she was detected, how was she allowed to carry on? I think that's a conversation that is worth having. But I just feel like the coverage
we framed it wrong.
Yes, exactly. And I just think that's what I wanted to say today.
No, well, you said it brilliantly, if you don't mind me saying that.
Thank you.
No, thank you. And I hope you ring me again on a slightly less fraught subject, but your contribution is incredibly valuable and I think probably needed, actually, Jay. So we'll drop that line now immediately about ordinariness, and because what does it even mean? That's my unconscious bias kicking in.
How am I less assuming or ordinary?
Hand on heart, if someone who looks like you was ever caught up in a situation like this, I think I would conduct the conversation in the same way, but I can't be sure, so I won't conduct it in the way that I have been doing.
Oh, well, thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Take care, Jay. It's 10:46. Yeah. And of course, there'll be racists furious about anybody bringing race into this conversation. But I've just shown you how you deal with it. You just go, yeah, you're right. The phrase English rose, what does that even mean if it isn't a reference to ethnicity? So you can criticise people for bringing ethnicity into it if you want to, but it should be people using the phrase English rose that you're criticising, not people like Jay wondering with much justification how this story would be treated if Lucy Letby didn't tick so many stereotypical boxes of Middle England, if you like, of white Middle England. It's 10:46. 10 to 11. The sentencing hearing is underway, as you know, with Lucy Letby, not expecting the sentence to be handed down by the judge until about 2 o'clock today, hearing from some of the families. The convicted killer, will not be appearing in the dock, which I completely understand why corners of the media get very exercised about that. I did find myself wondering why anybody would turn up for their own sentencing. Unless you actually want to make a public show of remorse. Some people could use it to make the situation worse. Some people demonstrating callousness could actually add to the horror of the grieving families, of the bereaved families. But the from sort of page sentiment that she should be dragged kicking and screaming into the dock, I completely get it. It's initially quite appealing, but I don't know. On the other hand, you sort of find yourself a little bit surprised that any convicted killer ever turns up for their own sentencing. It seems to have been quite a recent development, this. I don't know why. I've certainly not talked about it on the radio before, which means it hasn't really been in the news before. Of course it's cowardly, but you'd think that most people convicted of a crime like that would be cowards. 10:51 is the time. The question of how it could happen is one that, well, it is largely being answered. And the queue of consultants arguing that lives could have been saved if action had been taken sooner. Two of the paediatrician whistleblowers, Stephen Breary and Ravi Jayaram, adamant on that front, adamant on that subject. Instead of removing Letby from frontline care, they forced the two doctors to write a grovelling apology letter to the nurse for the stress and upset they had caused. I think it's poor journalism to put grovelling into that paragraph, but she filed a formal bullying complaint, and the hospital then processed it. Susan Gilby, who took over as chief executive of the trust after Letby's arrest, said that she found long-standing executives felt that doctors and particularly consultants could be a bit of a nuisance, which takes us back to the first caller that we had. She told the Times, there are no words. They were asked to apologise to someone we now know to be a serial killer for hurting her feelings. That adds perhaps to the sense of systemic collapse, doesn't it, rather than a sort of specific and unique horror. Kim's in Richmond. Kim, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello, Kim.
I'm a newly qualified nurse. I qualified in April.
Congratulations.
Thank you. My first experience with sort of the nursing culture and NHS management culture was as a first-year student. I had basically spoken to an elderly patient who had injured her knee out of nowhere, and she told me that a nurse had been transferring her, and she'd fell on the floor and just sort of been left there, and the nurse hadn't helped her, basically, and kept hush about it. So from her description, I had a clue who this nurse was, and I'd spoken to management, and straight away management said, oh no, none of my nurses would ever do something like that. And from that moment, from feeling like a valued member of the team and, you know, the nurses being really nice to me, no one wanted to help me with my training. No one wanted to take me on when our shift started. Oh no, we don't want the student today. That's what it went to. And over the next few years, I saw this time and time again where errors would be made, or negligence or neglect even, and no one would say anything. And I think really there's such a defensiveness in the practice of nurses in the NHS, and I have no clue why, but I've really come to the conclusion that I don't think everyone comes into this profession for the right reasons.
Okay.
Because you can't. If you allow these things to happen and you don't say anything, how can you be?
You're absolutely.
suited
I
to
mean,
be a nurse?
you're clearly right. It'd be naive to think otherwise. You know, there part of me though understands a bit of my job is to protect my team. Do you see what I mean? And you were a new arrival and therefore could still get filed under threat to team. So I can be fiercely protective of my team when the occasion demands. And I wonder whether that could, God forbid, extend into being a little bit dismissive perhaps of people raising concerns. I hope not. But it's the loyal, because I'm just pointing out that loyalty is a thing that we're encouraged to admire. Loyalty is a thing that we're encouraged to value and to cherish. And therefore, loyalty in that context, from the point of view both of the person you complain to and their colleagues, still looks like a positive.
Yes, I can agree with that. But
I mean, it's not. I'm not saying it is, but I'm saying that's how.
Yeah.
If we're trying to understand how this stuff can happen, that would be part of the explanation, I think.
Okay, but it's just so rampant, and it happens time and time again. And nurses, there's just such a culture of bullying, and
Oh, so you're not enjoying
it's
it?
awful.
You're not-
I haven't practiced since I qualified in April. I'm debating whether to go back. But
Well, I wonder if anybody listening might have any words of encouragement for you.
No.
No, I really do, because I mean, you could have just been unlucky, couldn't you? You could have just found yourself in a couple of bad contexts, and other contexts would have been much more enjoyable for you.
yeah, but I can see how this went under the rug
Because
for
the
so
gut
long,
reaction
because
is reputation protection, and I'm looking after my people.
Yeah, absolutely, that's it.
And also, consultants are a nuisance, or in your case, newly qualified nurses are a nuisance. This psychology of whistleblowing is fascinating, because you do circle the wagons. The first thing you do, you see it at media organisations as well. Historically, you do. It's getting a lot better now, but how can that go unchecked? How can these allegations have gone unremarked for so long? Because there's almost a psychological push to protect the reputation of the institution, which means not acknowledging the behaviour of the individual. And I don't know how you undo that. I really don't. Thank you, Kim. Jasmine's in Leeds. Jasmine, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi. Hi, James.
Hello.
First time speaking to you.
Welcome.
Hi, thank you for taking my call. I'm an NHS manager, and the reason for my call is I do agree with exactly what you just said in your sentence a couple of minutes ago. I do believe that the consultants in this case were correct.
Well, clearly.
I can understand that.
You're not getting any
correct.
prizes for that. Of course they were correct.
No, because I can believe that managers didn't turn a blind eye, didn't want to do anything, because it goes on. And these are managers that are in the higher bands, right? I am not in the higher band because, like your caller earlier, I did raise a few things, and that has suppressed my career.
You think? You know.
100%.
Sure, of course. Because you become a troublemaker. You become a nuisance, a problem.
Yeah. And I think in this, I hope they do have an inquiry, and I do hope there's accountability. I think managers there are a lot of managers within majority of trusts that do not have respect for consultants. They do find them a nuisance. Higher the bands of managers, the more they, you just get on my nerves, just shut him up.
How does that happen? What changes, or what explains it? Is that they don't understand how hard my job is? These consultants just swanning around the place like lords of the manor, and I'm the one that's got to get the hospital. Where does it come from?
It's like power.
power. They have the power over the consultant. Some of them are getting paid more than the consultants, believe it or not. Yeah, especially junior doctors and all that. They're getting paid double the amount of them. They're cruising. And it's power. They have the power over them. Yeah, and it's wrong. There are things that are going on in the NHS Trust that shouldn't be going on, but they just get pushed under the carpet because somebody else's problem. And I really hope that when this all now comes to light, these NHS managers that turned a blind eye, who are still working in different trusts, I heard on one of the programmes on the radio.
And also enjoying particularly lavish retirements.
Oh, yeah. They should be brought to accountability. There needs to be accountability, right?
Well,
because
then
it's all about reputation.
Yeah, but whose reputation would be fixed? Whose reputation would be improved or repaired by hauling these people over the coals? I'm all for it, for the record. I'm just wondering whether it's more out of vengeance than illumination that this impulse comes.
Well, we have a right to our patients to make sure that that there is accountability. We deliver patient care. We should regard if there's a problem in the private sector, it'd be totally different. They would stamp on it. In the NHS,
I'm not sure about that. I think reputation protection kit, because you've got the added profit. You can't have the police in here. We'll lose money, So I think that's the only.
That's true.
Yeah, but we can agree on that last bit. But everything.
There's things going on in my trust. That certain things going on. A certain department is failing. It's a risk to patients.
God.
Everybody has raised it. Everybody knows about it, but you just get pushed. Just shut up.
Get moved along. And then hope that I don't know. I'm not even any close to a position to be able to tell you what to do in those sort of circumstances. But you are right. The Times has a fairly good roster of people who perhaps could and should have done a lot more when the consultants were raising these concerns, including something I hadn't seen when I came on earlier, when I said, you can see what they'd say about having the police stomping through a neonatal ward in their size 12s. A former director of corporate affairs and legal services is reported to have said that the police coming in to investigate would be terrible for the hospital. At his home in Chester, a family member yesterday told journalists he has nothing to say. It's 11:01. It's 4 minutes after 11. I will tweet now a characteristically splendid piece of commentary by the secret barrister, which addresses that very tabloid-friendly question of why Lucy Letby is permitted not to be in the dock for her sentencing later today. As you would expect, it is a little more complicated than snake oil selling politicians from all sides of the House of Commons may contend. And I think at the moment, as the secret barrister points out, it is news reports suggesting that she may refuse to attend, but it's a piece that they wrote with regard to other examples of that happening, and I really recommend you read it. 5 minutes after 11 is the time. Okay, complete change now from the horrific to the almost sublime. We speak, of course, of the Lionesses and the defeat yesterday to Spain. It was a cracking game. Objectively speaking, it was a cracking game. There was about a 15-minute window midway through this first half where it looked like being an all-time classic. I mean, true end-to-end stuff, to coin a cliche. And we were the width of a crossbar away from going 1-0 up, and then just when you thought things couldn't get any more exciting, Mary Earp saved a penalty, which felt emotionally almost as good as an equaliser, but of course, that's an opinion. That's not counting. It was nowhere near as good as an equaliser. And subsequently, we didn't quite get it over the line. I want to talk about this, forgive me, from the perspective of a 51-year-old man. All right, okay, a 51-year-old man who tries to be a feminist. A 51-year-old man who succeeded, unlike Rishi Sunak, in not mentioning the fact that I am a father of daughters in the context of discussing this football. And it may be a little unfair to pick on people for doing stuff like that. A, because I used to do it, and B, because maybe the first thing you think of is your daughters, in which case somehow it seems perfectly pertinent to mention that you are. But the point is, of course, that you shouldn't have to be a father of daughters to care about everything from the Me Too movement right through to the success of the Lionesses. It's why I use the word feminist. It should be something that is driven by a desire for equality, not just a desire to see your own children have a slightly better time of it than previous generations of females. God, we've managed to pompify it already, haven't we, this conversation? But there you go. I thought it was marvellous, but as a 51-year-old man, I was pinching myself, actually. I've been pinching myself for a while, you know. I pinch myself when Question of Sport comes on. I pinch myself when I'm watching Sky and there are female footballers in the studio commentating. I mean, it happens occasionally on Match of the Day as well, doesn't it? Alex Scott has popped up on Match of the Day. And the reason I'm pinching myself is the speed at which it's happened. It was illegal. I always have to double check this. It was illegal for women to play football. They were so successful and so popular during the Second World War. I hope I've got this right. The women's teams that sprang up to fill a vacuum created by the fact that all the men were fighting. The women's teams were so successful and so popular that when the men came back from war, they had to kind of outlaw women's football in order to ensure that it didn't sort of take a chunk out of the tradition, and also I imagine a fat slice of misogyny there as well. Like, who's going to cook me dinner if they're out playing football all the time? But and I think it was in 1972 that the ban was lifted. I could be wrong. I hope something like that. That the first sort of Lionesses would have been there, but they would all have been amateurs. Here it is. Sue Wyatt was a goalkeeper in England's first official Lioness squad of 1972. She said, "In my day, football was never going to be a proper career because we had to pay our own way. I've never got a shirt or anything." She was watching it at Box Park in Wembley yesterday with other members of the original squad. And the reason I pinch myself looking at all this stuff is it's all happened in plain sight under our noses. And I still don't quite get it. For the avoidance of doubt, it's absolutely wonderful. But for the understanding of this issue, I have had calls on this programme, and I've only been here for 20 years, give or take. I've had calls on this programme telling me that it's outrageous for women to be running the line at a football game, or absolutely outrageous. And I took calls back in the day from men saying that women shouldn't be allowed to fly aeroplanes because it might be that time of the month. The speed with which this element of social change appears to have been undertaken is immensely gratifying, hugely gratifying. But actually, when you stop to track it, when you stop to track the speed with which it's happened, it's incredible. It's incredible. So I thought we'd just try to work out why. You get an awful lot, I guess, when you're talking about social change or social justice, you normally expect it to be accompanied by crusaders. You need a Martin Luther King. You need a Black Lives Matter. You need a suffragette movement or a suffragist movement. You need votes for women. This speedy catching up, and there's still a long way to go. Please don't think I'm naive. This speedy catching up seems to me to have happened quite organically. I know there are pioneers, and I know there are wonderful women who've pushed envelopes, but actually it just seems to have happened because it should have done. The American team seemed to be quite significant. The fact that America, and I guess America still in some ways leads the way culturally, even if not in this particular sport, the fact that American schoolgirls will grow up just as likely to play what they insist on calling soccer as American schoolboys. In fact, possibly more likely, because the American schoolboys will be drawn to American football or baseball or basketball. So is that something to do with it? But that doesn't explain why our sports broadcasting now, it used to be Sue Barker, really, didn't it? That was it. It was basically Sue Barker. And then for a while, it was Sue Barker and Claire Balding. Whereas now, magnificently, there's an absolute normalcy to female commentators and female former players popping up in almost any studio format, any studio context that you care to mention. So, I mean, I'd like to ask what it was like to be brilliant at football as a girl or a young woman 20 years ago or more, 10 years ago or more. Well, there you go. There's the first question. What's the tipping point? What do you think the tipping point is? That might be one more for text than tweet, 84850, or You can tweet at Mr. James OB. It was outlawed in 1921, so it was the First World War, not even the Second World War when that happened. Gillian in East 15 tells me, and it was reinstated in 1971, so the year before I was born. What was it like to be brilliant at football 10 years ago, or 20 years ago, or I doubt you're listening if you were knocking a ball around the park in 1921, but you never know. 100 years ago. I just want to know. And for the rest of us who don't have any personal experience of this at all, how and why has it happened so quickly? I bet you haven't thought about that, have you? I bet you've noticed it. You may not have noticed it. You may not have pinched yourself as just watching one of my daughters watching the football yesterday, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. And I appreciate reaching a World Cup final focuses the mind and increases the excitement. But how did this happen so quickly? And without, and you may well haul me up on this, but I think it's happened without the pioneers and the crusades that normally have to be undertaken in the face of huge resistance to achieve any form of social change. How has this happened so quickly? 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. Why and how has it happened so quickly? And as I look at this magnificent photograph of the 1972 Lionesses reacting to a missed goal opportunity as they watch it at the Box Park in Wembley yesterday, I am drawn. We took a wonderful call after the Euros, actually. Do you remember? I'm drawn to the question of, what was it actually like to be a football-loving young woman or girl and then I can't pin down the era precisely, but in my lifetime, certainly, and beyond, what was it like? What was it like? And how do you feel now watching it? Is there a bit of regret? Is there a bit of jealousy? Not jealousy, but a sort of, just a tiny tinge of regret that it wasn't like this in your day, because you would have been the Lionel Messi of your generation. Actually, why have I chosen a male player? That's absolutely ridiculous, isn't it? You could have been the Millie Bright of your generation, or the Lucy Bronze of your generation, or the Mary Earps of your generation. What explains it? Unless I've got it wrong, unless you want to tell me to wind my neck in, and it's not been that quick at all. It's been a long, slow grind, James, and you just weren't paying attention, so you didn't notice. But from where I'm sitting, it looks pretty speedy. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. How has this happened in such what I consider to be such a speedy fashion? And I do want to know what it was like, say, 2013 and earlier. Because these young women must have been playing at a fairly high level then in order to come up to where they were yesterday, to be on that conveyor belt, that ladder. So I'd say around 2010 or earlier, if you were brilliant at football in the last century and you loved it, what was it like? I presume that there was one player, I think, who played in the boys under-8s, and I looked at the photograph of it, and I might have been imagining things, but I think the lad sitting next to her, even though according to the coach she was the best player in the team, I think the lad sitting next to her had just edged a little bit towards his mate next to her. There's one girl in the team of under-8s, and I think the lad sitting next to her in the front row, or kneeling next to her in the front row, he might just have been leaning, or he might have lost his balance, but I just want to know what it was like. 0345 6060 973. We don't often give credit on the programme. We should probably do it more. Somebody somewhere somehow we've had a quiet revolution in our country, a quiet revolution, and it's a beautiful one. So who deserves the credit? 0345 6060 973. My thanks to Esther in Bournemouth for helping me out on the vocabulary. I think you're right, Esther. The word I'm looking for is lament. So while you enjoy enormously the performance of the Lionesses with the regret at the result, you also lament the fact that you grew up in a different world where that path was closed to you despite the fact that you loved football and were brilliant at it. 16 minutes after 11 is the time. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. I'm already getting rinsed. Listen, to clarify, I'm speaking about the speed with which it has gone in the last bit, right? I mean, that's what they say about going bankrupt, don't they? Who said that? How do you go bankrupt? First slowly, then quickly. Is it Gatsby? I think it might be Scott Fitzgerald. It's a great line. So obviously, well, look, I'll read this from Linda in Glasgow because I almost certainly deserve it. James, how has it gone so quickly? So speaks an ill-informed male. Ask a 60-year-old woman and hundreds like me who love footy and have been campaigning for decades to get to this point, you dumpling. Oh, there's a little insult I'm going to add to my arsenal. It's a lovely one, you dumpling. It's been hard work. It just didn't affect you. But that's part of the answer to the question. But when I said it's happened quickly, I meant the speed with which we've gone from me still getting calls from men complaining about women running the line at a football game, at a men's football game. I can't remember when that first happened. Someone can check and you'll get an idea of the timescale I'm talking about. That last bit of the journey, I fully accept my dumpling accusation from Linda. It hasn't happened quickly. Well, I may as well. In for a penny, in for a pound. I was running touch at the rugby when I was 13. I was playing rugby at 16. I played cricket at 15 and I'm now in my 50s. It's been a battle. Yes, but the last bit... and I like this from Laura in Renfrew. Last year, my son was moving up to high school. They went for an induction day, which was PE based. On arrival, the kids were split into two groups, football for the boys and gymnastics for the girls. Following complaints from parents, an apology was issued and the high school said they would not repeat that format in the future. There you go. Evidence that there's still a way to go. My son has zero interest in football and was quite bemused by the whole thing. So 2 questions. The first one of which is already coming in for more criticism than perhaps I expected. Well, I rephrase it then. So was it quick, this, or not? 0345 6060973. And what was it like to be brilliant at football as a woman prior to, off the top of my head, 2010? Let's start with Mason, who's in Hackney. Mason, what would you like to say?
Hello, mate. You all right?
Very well. What's on your mind?
I was working at the FA, actually, at kind of the turning point, I believe.
Oh, yeah. Not you. You're not claiming you were the turning point, are you?
No, I'm definitely not the turning point. I was a tiny cog in a massive wheel. So there was... The FA as an institution has always been run by older white gentlemen, to be quite honest with you. And I'm not one to give them any praise, but there was a point about 10 years ago where somebody made a decision to push the WSL, which is the Women's Premier League.
Yeah.
And... money was put into that and there was money pumped into it, and from that emerged all this talent and this really good group of talented individuals that became the Lionesses, basically. And there was a lot of people behind the scenes working, a lot of women actually working behind the scenes, which is, again, it's a rarity, especially in an institution like the FA. But there was a core team of women behind the team that then became the team on the pitch, you know. So the Lionesses on the pitch were backed by a load of Lionesses off the pitch as well. There was a real push behind the scenes. And I hate to give the FA praise, like I said, but they have did do a really good job.
We need to. You know, I'm guilty of this as well. Sometimes we've lost the ability of being warm, and they've got obviously a few skeletons in their closet. But if they got this right, they got this right.
Yeah. And I think it was matched around the world as well. There's talent emerged around the world. I mean, this push for the WSL was great, and the Lionesses emerged out of it. But also from that, there was this also talent around the world, like Marta from Brazil and Rapinoe in America. These people that were becoming these superstars, these Beckham-esque superstars with commercial value, that's led the way for these players now to go and make some money and sort of get up there with the men now as well. Like we're seeing now that some of these players' commercial value out in the world is almost matching the men now, even though they're not getting paid the same wage, and that's a whole other conversation.
Well, yes, of course it is, and we may well have it. But so what year would you put on it roughly then, Mason?
Say about 10 years ago.
So sort of a generation of young women who were girls then, aged sort of between 10 and 15.
Yeah, I'm 41, and there was like girls who played football at my age. But at my age, there was, you know, a girl playing football was rare. But there were girls playing football. I imagine 10 years younger than me, there's a lot more. And now I see my niece. I've got 3 boys, but my nieces play football. All the girls that I see around playing football, wearing football kits, it's amazing to see, you know.
It is amazing to see. And it is, I'm not going nuts, am I? It is remarkably quick, the speed with which we've gone from 0 to 60. I appreciate getting to the starting line. I have ignored in my analysis, and hundreds of women who've spent years getting them to the starting line. But if you see the starting line as the one you pick as around about 2010, that decade and a half since has been incredible.
I think it's quick from a visibility point of view, you know, because if you're going from nothing to all of a sudden it's there, it's on BBC, it's on ITV, it's in the faces of the people that don't normally watch that stuff.
Yes.
It is, but if you look at it, actually, there's been a whole load of work going on for years and years behind the scenes, and there was
going
people
back 25 years, the grassroots sort of picking up, and
Yeah.
then. So in a way, it's a bit chicken and egg. So the FA was as much perhaps responding to a growing clamour as it was creating. I don't know if it was. I don't know who made that decision, but there was a decision made to push ticket sales and get the attendances up for WSL games. So I don't know if that's a push from the clubs. Yeah.
They know this talent. If it's a push from the FA, they see that there's a market there. It's all going to have commercial value. They're not doing it from the goodness of their hearts, but there's going to be a value in it for them. There's going to be a selling point. There's going to be something they can sell or something. And if it's there, they're going to push it. So it's obviously there now. You know,
a few quid to be made as well, I suppose, is part of, as you allude to, is going to be part of the process as well. Thank you, Mason. A couple of people actually listening today who used to work for the FA, and this one here saying it's about 25 years ago that I worked at the FA 25 years ago, says Jason. The groundwork was being done then. And Mason couldn't help it, could he? I mean, things don't normally work. We normally sit here going, how the hell have they managed to waste that much money? Or, my God, they didn't even lay a single brick of that bloody bridge. Or, what happened over there was HS2. We just get cross about you lads getting cross of this. Just looks like somebody somewhere sitting in an office has played a blinder. I wonder who it is. Desmond's in Willesden. Desmond, what would you like to say?
Mr. James O'Brien, massive fan of yours, I have to say.
Well, this will be an anti-climax for you, Desmond. I can only apologise in advance.
But I've put it out on my socials that I do believe that, in particular, the Chelsea manager, the female for the women's team, I think that she's good enough to manage one of the Premiership teams, as in the males Premiership teams. I just believe that it's about time. If you're good enough, it doesn't matter what sex you are, how old you are, whatever. It's about time that one of the females, and even the English manager for the girls, she should be managing one of the.
You could have checked her name before you came on.
I know. I do apologise, but yeah. I'm a bit nervous.
That's all right. That's perfectly feasible. The speed is the thing I'm interested in. I guess you're right. We're looking at the next milestone, which would be a female manager moving into the men's game. Didn't they have a go? Didn't Forest Green appoint a woman briefly? Didn't Dale Vince appoint? Wasn't there a female? No, I may have imagined. Have I imagined that? I didn't someone break the? I could be wrong, but that would be the next.
That's because obviously the other day, when that lady who did the line, she was the lino, and you had the guys in Sky who came out with some sort of sexist comments, and
yes, that was it. That's what I'm thinking of. Maybe that's what I was thinking of. That's the speed. So if you take it from that moment to today, that's why I'm talking about the speed with which it's happened, not the idea that it suddenly arrived fully formed at the starting line. It obviously took a while to get there. I wonder who'll be first, Desmond. It'd be interesting to see that. Is it? I can't remember the name of the. Is it Emma Hayes at Chelsea? I think it's Emma Hayes who's managing Chelsea at the moment. John's in Chesham. John, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello, John.
When I managed youth football back in, I'm going to say early 2000s, might have been 99, 98, 2000s. We had a girl in there that. She couldn't play up after under-11s.
There was literally nowhere for her to go.
Nowhere for her to go. So her dad started a team in our town.
Right.
Started a team. She went on and played for England 30-odd times. Then...
Seriously? What was her name?
Yes. Do you know what? I'm flipping just trying to think now.
You and Desmond, the pair of you, honestly, you're kind of setting the calls back decades, aren't you now? You come on, play, and England male played 30-odd times, and you knew them when they were a kid. I bet you'd remember their name.
The trouble is, I see her quite regularly. I see her dad quite regular as well. It's not even making it worse.
Not making it better, John.
I'm old age. Yeah,
well, you can have that. You can have that. I'll
but then but the one I can remember her name.
Yes.
Right, we've got a girl that's come when my son started managing. The girls can play up to 18. So I think that might have been 15 at that time, but it's now 18. And out of those four, three have carried on playing. Two are playing for our local side, team side, and one is playing for Arsenal's under-21s.
That's pretty good,
She's already knocking on the England door, and the last few months she's been training with Arsenal's first team. And I mean, and that's for every player like that. There's a 500
young girls coming up thinking
Well,
I'm going to play as well. How do you explain? So listen, I've worked out what question I should have asked half an hour ago, John, and like you, I'm going to blame old age for not being fully across the facts. It was in 2011 that Andy Gray and Richard Keys were being just stupid, misogynistic and old about a 25-year-old woman who was running the line at a Liverpool Wolves match, and they were making hilarious jokes about somebody needs to get down there and explain the offside rule to her, and Andy Gray said, can you believe that? A female linesman, women don't. So that is 12 years, that's 2011. That's why I say it's happened quickly. In that 12 years, we've gone from two of the highest profile pundits on British television being unapologetically misogynistic about one female lineswoman to yesterday. In 12 years, that's incredible.
I think it is quick, and I think what's happened is that's happened. Plus, I'm going to big Chesham up, obviously, but I think we were one of the first, definitely in our area.
I like it. So it's all down to Chesham.
Brought the girls in. We've got a really good girls set up down in Chesham, very good set up.
It's one of those things that you sit here now thinking...
And I noticed...
Go on.
But what I did notice, James, is that we were the only side up until COVID. So that would have been under 15s when Mills went to Arsenal. So she was the only girl in the whole of our division.
Is that right?
Was playing, yeah. But I mean, but she had a choice. She could have gone and played with the girls' side. Well, she did actually play with the girls' side as well as.
Yeah.
And the thing.
So these are the pioneers, then. These are the people that you've taken me right up to the news, John. So I'm going to crack on. So that's the point. It's the girls that play. So anybody my age thinks immediately of Gregory's Girl, the film with Claire Grogan and John Gordon Sinclair. But it is the girls who just refused to be told that they couldn't carry on playing, who I suppose broke glass ceilings. John, thank you, mate. It's 11:31. Thomas Watts is here with your headlines. 11:34 is the time. Okay, here's a question. I want you to think about this. As a woman, right, why is watching women play football different from watching men play football? Because those numbers are spectacular. And there will be a lot of women who watched that game that don't normally watch a lot of football. I mean, probably World Cups are different. World Cup finals are different. But if I'm going to find a question which I can ask from a position of complete ignorance, it would be that one. What? Because it's the same game. It's the same rules. The ball is the same shape. Why, as a woman, did you find the experience of watching yesterday's game different from any previous experiences of watching the men's game? If indeed you did, I've just done a quick straw poll of female colleagues, and they all tell me that this is a valid question, but they might be weirdos, and nobody else had felt any difference at all. So you can come at it from either angle. But I sense there is a different, what's the word I'm looking for? Tone? Different palette? There's a different feel to the game. Why? And don't hold back on this, because some of the answers are popping into my head as I speak, but I'm obviously a woman, so I'm obviously not a woman, so it would be a little bit daft of me to articulate my theories. But why, as a woman, did you find watching women play football a different experience from watching men? Okay, so that's one of the questions that we're asking. If I was better at this job, if I was a better radio phone-in host, I'd have started by reminding you of the recording from 2011 of Andy Gray and a bloke called Richard Keys who believed their microphones were switched off. And I don't think it was the most obnoxious conversation that they were recorded having actually during that period, but this is more pertinent to our conversation today. Can you believe that? A female linesman. Women don't know the offside rule. To which Keys replied, of course they don't. I can guarantee you there'll be a big one today. Kenny will go potty. This isn't the first time, is it? Didn't we have one before? The game's gone mad, he adds. Did you hear charming Karen Brady this morning complaining about sexism? Do me a favour, love. Karen Brady, of course, was vice chairman of West Ham at the time. And now I think probably even better known for The Apprentice. So she'd written a column saying she'd experienced sexism at its rankest, lies about my personal life and a level of calculated mischief that is simply appalling, talking about sexism in football. So I don't think my question was wrong. I still accept Linda's description of me as a dumpling when I said it's been very, very quick. But to go from 2011, when two of the highest profile pundits in the British media, in the British football media, could have a conversation like that without even thinking they were doing anything wrong, albeit off-air, to yesterday, in 12 years. 12 years. How has it happened so quickly? 0345 606 0973. I suppose I'm asking, how have the dinosaurs been silenced so quickly and so effectively when it normally takes decades? And then, of course, the other bit I'm interested in is, why is it a different game? Why for you is it a different watching experience? 11:37 is the time. Greta's in Brighton. Greta, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi there. Sorry, I thought I needed to pipe up because there was a lot of men calling in.
That's
so
a very
a little
good
bit
point.
More of a
It's a very
female.
good point. Yes, thank you. Thank goodness you're here.
So I played football semi-professionally in Australia when I was a teenager, so about that 10-year mark that you're talking about.
Yeah.
And I think growing up and seeing Bend It Like Beckham made a massive difference. That sort of came through, and it was a film that wasn't about, women doing well at dancing or gymnastics.
No.
It was about football.
2002, wasn't it, I think, roughly, around about then? But, of course, then it's around for forever, isn't it? So you watch it at whatever age.
Yeah, of course, but that kind of was like the first chance that you could see like a woman playing football and that it was possible to be good at it and grow and create that sort of camaraderie with the women team. So
what I loved about that film was that it was absolutely free of tokenism or knowingness. It was a completely straight storyline, wasn't it? With that big denouement at the end of a big reward, a big achievement. Just it was unapologetically about women's football.
Yeah, it was. And I think what you were asking earlier, like what makes a difference, I think there's a level of, I don't know, toxic masculinity sometimes in men's football.
No
and it's kind of taken out a little bit in women's football. And I don't know, it's just nice to see that so many women were getting on board for the World Cup this year.
Why did you stop? What was it? Was it personal, or was it the atmosphere, or just that it wasn't the right time to go further?
No, I was a goalkeeper and I broke my wrist, and the woman who broke my wrist is now playing for Australia. So I'm happy that happened.
Wow.
But
was she in the semi-final game?
Yes, she was. She was.
Well, there's a story. Crikey. And it was such a bad break that it ended your career, or you just...
It did, yeah. I just couldn't really get over the pain of it all, and, it takes a lot. You've got to be brave to be a goalkeeper.
And it wasn't... Yes, I dabbled a bit myself, Greta, many, many years ago. I once accidentally put my head where the ball should be, which is the biggest danger that goalkeepers face, I think, on a match-to-match basis. And obviously, it was an accident.
Yeah, of course.
So you're still
she
friends.
Has an incredible. I wouldn't say we're friends, but she has an incredible shot on her, and the whole team are amazing. The Matildas are great, and the Lionesses are amazing too.
But it could have been you. It could have been you.
Oh, I don't know about that.
I love it. Thank you, Greta. Well, there you go. I won't ask which player it was. That wouldn't be fair, would it? Because she doesn't want to be followed around with the guilt of Greta's wrist for the rest of her days. Katie is also in Brighton. There you go. Katie, what would you like to say? Did anyone playing in the World Cup this year break your wrist when you were young?
No, unfortunately not.
Sorry, I can't talk to you then. That's the bar. That's now the qualification for coming on the programme. Any other bones, any other limbs broken by international football? Oh, all right then. Carry on then. Oh, boring.
Not my claim to fame. What I wanted to say was how much I enjoy women's football, and it reminds me, I did years ago in the dim and distant past, I did a degree in anthropology.
Oh, yes.
And the thing I remember about it is doing an essay on who provides the nutrition. So basically, women will go out, they'll get the nuts and the seeds and the berries and dig for roots, all the unglamorous stuff. And what they do is they cooperate. So you look after my child today, I'll go and get the food in, and then vice versa tomorrow. And what the men do, every quarter, I think it is, there's a hunter's moon where you get that beautiful full moon. They dress up, they go out with their spears and their bows and arrows.
They don't dress up. I'll let you indulge in a little bit of lazy stereotyping, but I don't think they dress up. They might wrap up warm or something.
Well, no, I think it's more than that. It's a total show, and this is the point. Yeah. It's a total show of, look at me, aren't I great? I brought back the woolly mammoth, which feeds the population for a long, long time. But it's a way of getting your genes into the next generation. So by being the best hunter, they get the best mate. And that is how biology works. We're all designed to get our genes into the next generation. But women do it through cooperation, looking after each other's kids, and men do it through competing. And you can see it in politics, and that's why women should be running the world.
There is, I suppose, some COVID observations perhaps to be made at this point about different approaches to managing the pandemic from countries where the head of the government was female. So listen, I think your anthropological analysis is accurate, and I think that the sort of Darwinian drive to reproduce has been fairly represented. But how exactly does that translate onto the football pitch?
Well, if you look at the women's team, they play as a team. Whereas if you watch men, it's a lot more...
Are you sure about this? Are you sure?
Yeah, and even the crowds. If you look at the crowds, it's a totally different scenario. It's very, very different.
Okay. I mean, there might be something. I can't think of any obvious glory hunters.
Well, I tell you what would be really interesting is Serena Beekman got a job managing a men's team and seeing how different. That would be my, that would be my moment supreme. I would love to see that.
Beautifully put. I tell you what I wondered yesterday, because you're not the first person to say that. I think Desmond said it earlier on the programme, actually. I wonder whether that is actually an unhelpful thought. And I've had it myself, because it's as if saying she won't really have cracked it until she's coaching men, whereas actually coaching women.
No, I'm not saying that. I just think it would be interesting to see.
Yes, of course it would. From an anthropological point of view, Katie, as much as anything else, it would be. Yes.
Yeah, I knew it would come in handy one day.
My mate did anthropology and he's still waiting. It's coming up to 11:45. You're listening to... I don't want to get trolled now by the anthropology. I'd learn how to say it first. Community. Joe's in Woking. Joe, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Massive fan.
Oh, well, thank you. How lovely.
Really lovely to speak to you, and I read your books.
Oh, thank you.
But I'm ringing because you asked the question, like, why do you think women were watching it yesterday? And I've been at a festival this weekend, the Rewind Festival in Henley, so it's loads of people in there. Like, I'm in my mid-50s, and there's loads of people in their 40s and 50s there. Fantastic. And I stayed in a hotel nearby, and when it got to yesterday morning, I was like, I really, really want to watch the football. Went down to the reception, and everybody, all the women who were wearing, pink and 80s, whatever, they're not leaving the hotel. And we stood and sat and watched the football for 2 hours. Fantastic. When the festival opened at 12, nobody left. We stayed to watch the football. And I was with my girlfriend, and I'm just, the reason I think that we're doing it, I'm in my mid-50s. I'm very sporty, but I haven't played football. But I've been a football supporter in my life back in, 20 years ago. I was like bored and decided I wanted something to follow, and I started following Chelsea. So I've watched lots of football on telly. I've even watched them live. But I kind of gave it up after, life changes happened, and I was like, do you know what, I do my kids or whatever. And suddenly I'm like, hang on, there's women's football. And I think that the reason that it's become this really positive thing to go and, watch the matches. I watched all of the Euros. I think for many women anyway, I feel like we've all suddenly got permission to be sports fans about a women's game. And I say that genuinely, I'm going for Me Too, because I think what Me Too has done is it's opened a massive load of conversations amongst women about how many of us have been abused, how many of us have been groped, how many of us, and we start talking about these things that we've buried, including like sexism at work and misogynistic opinions. We've all lived through it. And the Me Too movement kind of opened conversations around, we've all experienced this, and we need to start backing each other. And it's this like underlying feeling that we've got a sisterhood. That's a word I do feel is true. Like, I'm looking out for you, you're looking out for me. Hang on, I will interrupt if some bloke speaks to you misogynistically. I'll step in. And then we've got women on the telly being the most incredible athletes.
Yes.
Right. And even when we were watching the match yesterday, I was looking at the girls just going, these are women who feel awesome in their bodies. How fantastic is that? And they're proud of themselves. They're physically capable. It's like they don't look sexy. Do you know what I mean? They look like amazing women. And I'm just like, we're backing these girls. They can meet the world. They can just do what they want.
I love that. I love that because at first I wasn't quite sure where you were going with it, but it is about no longer accepting that there are things you can't do. So, the nature of the Me Too thing was such a a shock to men, even men who thought they were fairly emotionally literate, and just the sheer scale and the sheer horror of it. And women would say, well, there was no point complaining, or we didn't complain, or we didn't. And then suddenly the question, well, why? Why can't we do these things? Why can't we say these things? Why can't we go? There is a huge link, perhaps, between the attitudes.
Yeah. I just feel like we've all got each other's backs in a way that wasn't even a conversation before. You just knew or even like white goods jokes would still be kicking around 10 years ago. Women, look like all dishwasher. You should be wearing white because you've got a matched dishwasher. Those kind of things, like, inherently would make you angry, but no one was allowed to say that wasn't appropriate. Whereas now, no, stuff it. We don't put
absolutely
up with that.
Stuff it. And if you don't stuff it, we'll get Mary Earps to tell you where to go. I think
exactly right.
that was a moment. So was there some poor band in Henley just looking out at an empty field, wondering where their audience had gone?
Probably.
Is that probably? Well, there you go. You live and learn. Joe, thank you. Take care. I love that idea as well, and that is actually almost a counter to the idea that it's happened quickly. It's a sort of a process of attrition. It's 11:48. It is 10 to 12, and we should probably give a shout out to Katarina. Well, we definitely should. Katarina Johnson-Thompson, who in many ways couldn't have picked a worse day to pick up her second World Championship gold in the heptathlon, because of all the attention that was, of course, focused on the football in Sydney. But that's an astonishing achievement. My mum, she came second, I think, in the 800 last night, which was enough to win the heptathlete. And my mum needed us to explain to her why she got a gold medal, even though she came second in the race. It says, well, there's been 6 other events before we got... Anyway, it is 9 minutes to 12. Jules is in Harpenden. Jules, what would you like to say?
Oh, hello, James.
Hello,
just really about the male perception of female football. I've got 3 sons. Well, they're all men now. They all follow football, every single Premiership game. But they just do not get female football. And I'm saying this, and it's probably very controversial. I'm probably loads of people are now shouting at the radio.
Of course they're not. It's not because it's not you. I mean, they might be wondering what you've done wrong as a mum, Jules, to raise such Neanderthals, but they can't shout at the radio.
They are. I grew up with football, so I was Pat Jennings in goal because I had a brother. There was no way in this world that my dad would have allowed me to go and play football. It just wasn't a done thing all those years ago. So, but I would have loved if anyone says to me now, what would be your dream job? I would have said a football manager.
Oh, gosh. It just wasn't. You might as well have said, I don't know, unicorn jockey or something like that back in the day. What? So did the boys not watch the game yesterday then?
One of them went down the pub to watch it and just came back and just said, I can't even go there with them. And
I don't get that. Because I watch a lot. I watch quite a lot of football, and it was a really, really good game.
It
objectively,
was an amazing match. And also, I mean, my argument to them was, I listened to what they say, but my argument to them was, I mean, Spain were unreal. Yeah. You've got Barcelona players, Madrid players.
It was the triangles, wasn't it? It was. There were a couple of points when they were right back in their own half, and they passed their way out of it.
They got fire in their belly, and their shots on target were unreal.
It was just good football. It was just good football.
Good football. I thought that. I have to say, and I'll be completely honest, I don't follow female football. I've just been born and bred.
No, of course, most people don't. But it happens slowly, doesn't it? Well, it happens slowly and then quickly. But I bet there'll be a huge number of people now finding out a little bit more about their local women's team at club level.
Yeah. But I also, the thing for me is I do think it is, in the schools, it isn't there. There isn't that thing. There isn't. I mean, the school that my boys went to, it was rugby for the boys and lacrosse for the girls.
Very posh.
And, well, it's not. It's a state school, but so they were born. They didn't go to an all-boys school. They went to a unisex school.
But the girls weren't playing football.
The girls aren't playing. However, they did have a girl that plays for Arsenal. So they did have that, in there, and they are around top sports people especially where we live. However, their whole persona on female football, they're
children of their era. I mean, it's I guess that's just the way it goes, and it will change slowly. But the the initial resistance can be a little bit performative as well. This is good. You'll like this, Jules. This text came in while you were talking from John. I'm rubbish at football and my other half is amazing. When we're in the park kicking a football around, my male friends don't tend to comment on how awesome my partner is, but on how much better she is than me, as if that's going to hurt me because I'm a bloke and rubbish at football. That's part of it, isn't it? It's just you're dealing with decades of tradition and normal behaviour. Jules, thank you. I'll read the rest of that, actually. Why would they do that? Why would it hurt me that my other half is brilliant at football? I'm immensely proud of her. It's also incredible when she runs circles around these guys who think they're automatically better than her because they happen to have a penis. There's a lot of work to be done, James. My group are pretty progressive in many ways, but toxic masculinity is so ingrained and powerful that it can make good people say extremely stupid things. Why did we not have this conversation about the cricketers when they won the One Day International World Cup in 2017, asks Peter. Well, you answer your own question. I understand that football has a wider reach, but look at any England women's cricket match and what they do for the fans. I don't know is the short answer. You got Rachel Hayhoe-Flint and Charlotte Edwards, so I don't know that I could name any female footballers from their era, from the Rachel Hayhoe-Flint and Charlotte Edwards era, but I guess football is part of our culture. It has a different relationship with the national culture from cricket. 11:55 is the time. That's a lovely call from Jules. Lynn's in Havant. Lynn, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
It's lovely talking to you.
Thank you. Likewise.
Yes, I'm in my 70s. I've never watched football. I've tried a few times. It's just too slow and boring. And it just seems to me that there's always these two men at the back by their goalkeeper, kicking the ball backwards and forwards to each other and then to the goalkeeper, but they don't seem to be driving forward.
No.
So when I started to watch the women's football just by accident, I thought, my God, this is a different game. They're attacking, they're going forward the whole time. I feel quite emotional talking about it because I really get, really choked up because it's just such a wonderful game to watch. It's just so different. It's exciting and they play together. They're like a team. They're looking for each other. Whereas the men's football that I've seen, they don't seem to be. It's all about them individually.
I think that's a little. I mean, I've watched more men's football than you have, so I am allowed. I am allowed to say that's probably a little bit unfair, but I think there's definitely something in it. Possibly because they're I mean, I don't know if there's the fear of losing that makes you play in a very different way, and going out onto a pitch, you haven't got people shouting abuse at you from both ends, your own side if you do something wrong. So a little bit more freedom is what you're describing. I think they play with a little bit more freedom, perhaps. Yeah,
I found it very, very exciting. I've loved watching.
Oh, how lovely!
All of it. It's been
it's time to start playing, Lynn.
Not in my 70s.
well, nonsense. There's no such word as can't. That's absolutely the right time. I love that. Thank you. You describe it brilliantly as well. That sort of notion of a little bit more freedom, a little bit more fluidity on the park. 11:57 is the time. To my shame, I've never watched Kidderminster Harriers women's team play football, which I suppose is pertinent. Most followers of football clubs won't have gone to see the female team play, but I should certainly know more about. If I lived in Kiddie, I would have done, but I'm not there enough. Rosemary's in Wimbledon. Last word on this, Rosemary. What's it going to be?
Oh, well, I had the pleasure of playing for my youth club. I'm 66 now, and I was either 14 or 15 at the time.
Okay.
And we were entered into the very first West Riding, as it was called there, five-a-side girls football kick out.
Yes.
And we qualified. We went to Roundhay Park in Leeds, which was a place where they had large events, and we won. And Billy Bremner congratulated us and presented us with our little trophy on the day.
Blimey.
And he also came to our youth club.
Did he?
But it was a young
manager of Leeds United at the time. For my listeners who aren't as clued up as you are.
Of the Leeds United.
The Leeds,
they were at the time. He was probably one of up there with George Best and very other well-known world players. In the annals of my storage, there is a photograph taken with him, but there's no way I could get hold of it today.
It's buried.
What?
But it was. Why did you stop?
Because it was the only time I'd ever been given the opportunity to play football. And I myself and my teammates, we just absolutely loved it. We had a full team, an 11 side as well. But there was no opportunity after that to... I initially started in the nursing profession.
Right.
And there was nowhere, there was no local football club in the hospital near where I was at all.
There wasn't one. I don't think they were anywhere, were they? Really?
No, they weren't. So it was really. I think it was such a. John Coulter, I think, was the guy. He seemed much older than us, but when I recall now, he probably was in his early 20s, and he just had this vision, and I just. We kept getting told we couldn't play football. I just said, you say that men maybe have a fear of losing. And I think that's possibly right. I think women have a determination to win. And I think there's a difference between those two. But incredibly happy days. Absolutely delighted.
It was special.
To see the Lionesses. And they were and they are special. And they've given us a reason to be proud.
And there'll be 14 or 15-year-olds playing...
No, but completely.
Who are never going to stop now. They're never going to stop.
I mean, yes, no one would have ever given me career advice to play football.
No.
Even though we were clearly very good.
Well, you were the best in the riding, best in Yorkshire.
Yeah, totally, absolutely.
It's never too late, Rosemary, to get the girls back together. That'd be a good film. You get Richard Curtis to write the film script.
Are you offering?
Well, I'm a bit busy myself at the moment. Also, no, I'm not good enough. You need someone who would be able to give you some decent... Well, that'd be a cracking tale, wouldn't it? It would be like a sort of Calendar Girls, but football. Thank you, Rosemary. It is 1 minute after 12. It is 4 minutes after 12, and we are going to have a completely different conversation. I mean, we've touched on some of these themes before, and I have to confess I haven't read the book, but it's almost as if it were designed to appeal to my very particular and peculiar interests. The headline is Parents May Share Blame for Stress Left by Boarding School. It looks at a new book that challenges the widespread notion that ex-boarders have been damaged by the experience and argues that for the massive majority of people who attended boarding schools, there are no of these consequences. And I don't normally do this because it involves a degree of arrogance. But I'm going to challenge it, despite the fact that I haven't read the book. But I'm going to do it in quite an interesting way, which I'll explain shortly. It's also reading. It's always a little bit risky to read a newspaper article about a book, and then take that as the sort of gold standard of what the book actually contains. But it does say on the publisher's blurb, the book is challenging the current understanding of boarding school syndrome, proposing a move beyond the term and its concept. And given that much of my last book was about boarding school syndrome, which my producer clearly hasn't read because she just said that there are very few signs in me that I attended boarding school. Most of my last book was about it, and I mention it in my new book very briefly, just in the context of explaining the Boris Johnson-David Cameron relationship and the impact that had subsequently upon the entire population. Cyril Connolly put it very well in his book, Enemies of Promise, and I'll share that quote with you in a minute. But what I want to do on this is talk to people who didn't go to boarding school and fell in love with someone who did. Because some of the most interesting communications I've received from people since my last book came out, How Not to Be Wrong, The Art of Changing Your Mind, were from people... Because I write in the book quite a lot about therapy. And that's why I think that this book might be coming at things from slightly the wrong angle. Because you show me somebody who says boarding school didn't do me any harm, and I will show you me 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. I will show you 10-year-old me coming out of the headmaster's study with my hands like sandwiched in my armpits like that. You know, when you do that, when you cross your arms and you put, if you're cold, and I'm doing that because I've just been beaten really quite viciously. And in my internal dialogue, I am already going, this doesn't hurt, this doesn't hurt, this doesn't hurt, this isn't doing me any harm, this isn't doing me any harm, this isn't doing me any harm. So the subtext of the book is pretty grim as well, because it says that family relationships and parenting are key to how children experience boarding schools, which again I don't agree with. But I am really interested in how it looks to other people. What's it like to fall? So if someone who didn't go to boarding school falls in love with someone who did, how can you tell? What is it that you think boarding school did to them? Hit the numbers now. You will get through. Okay, 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. Oddly, the first two people to ring in are both blokes. I thought it would be the other way around. But what I think what it does to you, in a nutshell, is teach you a survival personality. The idea of the stiff upper lip. I'm just looking up the quote from Cyril Connolly because it's so good. I want to share it with you. But here's the bit I don't really get, because the thing is, right, you don't know what cogs are turning inside you, and you don't know what is innate, what is put there. You don't know what's natural and what is learned. Of all the behaviours you do, of all the habits you have. Think about temper. Temper is a wonderful example. Do you have a good temper or a bad temper? Are you a bad-tempered person or a good-tempered person? And you will probably have a view on that. But do you have to be bad-tempered, do you think? Do you have any choice about being bad-tempered? Is it possible that you are bad-tempered because there are roots going right down in your personality to your earliest days? Could your bad temper be linked to things that you experienced when you were very, very young? Does your refusal to really sit with other people's pain have its roots in your childhood, when you spent a huge amount of time persuading yourself that it wasn't doing you any harm, that you were absolutely fine? I love this topic because I think it explains England. I think the invention of schools that were designed to make boys believe that they had the right to go to any other corner of the world and not just visit, but take over. I think it explains a huge amount of the problems in English society. The idea that you are raised, you are literally taught that these schools, that you as an alumnus of this school, you have the right to go to India, or you have the right to go to, this is how they started off, obviously this isn't happening now, you have the right to go to India and govern the natives. Not just govern the natives, but help yourself to the natural resources. The children of empire, for me, prove the point about boarding schools, but then I left 30 odd years ago, so it may be that the world is very, very different now. So that really is the question that I want you to answer. How much damage do you think boarding school did to you? 0345 6060 973. And crucially, I think the more interesting angle would be if you fell in love with a fella, or indeed a woman, who went to boarding school and you didn't. Talk to me about emotional distance. Talk to me about the things that you know have been done to them, the things that they have become as a consequence of these experiences, rather than the real. Because when I did therapy, and I found myself wondering how on earth Mrs. O'Brien had put up with me for so long, it's because the people who love you can see the essence of you. They can see the real you. And any form of childhood trauma involves strapping on armour and strapping on personalities that are inauthentic. Now, they are survival personalities. There's no earthly way that I would be doing what I'm doing now if I hadn't learned these quite damaging habits when I was a child. There's no way Boris Johnson would have become Prime Minister if he hadn't learned these incredibly damaging habits when he was a child. He's just not lucky enough to have reached a point where he understands that they're damaging. You'd have thought, as he careers from marriage to affair to disaster to shame, that he at some point might have stopped to think, why am I like this? And then really good therapy would have helped him understand why he was like this. And it has a lot to do with abandonment issues, or crucially with having to convince yourself that you're happy when you're not. So there are benefits. I'm not talking about that, but I'm interested in what is known loosely as boarding school syndrome, and how you would explain it to somebody who knows nothing about it. So 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. And I love the idea of coming at this angle, not exclusively from the perspective of people who were sent away to school. See, even the language is loaded, isn't it? Sent away to school. I didn't feel I was sent away to school. I felt it was a wonderful opportunity that was being bought for me by people who wanted the very best for me. But then I got there and there was some right old bar stewards in charge of my daily existence, and I put an awful lot of effort into persuading myself that they weren't hurting me when they were. So the perspective of people, not just who went through it, 0345 6060 973, but very much also people who've fallen in love with us. Okay? You've fallen in love with someone who went to a boarding school, so you can see things that perhaps they can't. You can see elements of their personality that they don't recognize because that's all they've ever known. That's who they are. It's a survival, well, we call it a survival personality for a reason. The study did find that those who had been sent away to school at a younger age were more likely to show signs of having been affected by a traumatic event. But they're looking at anxiety, and they're looking at people who need psychological treatment. Depression, trauma, and anxiety. I think they've got it wrong. I think they're looking for the wrong things, because the negative impacts of these sort of experiences in post-imperial society create strength. They create, they deliver success. Look at our country. Look at high court judges. Look at newspaper editors. Look at prime ministers in recent years, and then look at the hugely disproportionate number of them that went to boarding schools. And part of it is privilege and wealth, obviously, paying the fees for a school like that. But the skills you learn are still rewarded by British society while making you a much less happy, a much less authentic person. And that is the end of my TED Talk. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. If you can explain either the things about the person you love that you know are a consequence of them going to boarding school, 0345 6060 973, or if, like me, you went to one, what you understand boarding school syndrome to be, because it's not about depression and anxiety necessarily. It can be about something very, very different. So I spent 35 plus years adamant that being regularly beaten had done me no harm at all. Absolutely adamant about it. I'm going to tell you about the breakthrough moment in my life, because it's absolutely at the heart of boarding schools. And people who don't go to boarding schools get beaten. No one's claiming an exclusive monopoly on it. But I'm sitting in a little room in West London in a state of still mild skepticism and cynicism about the whole process of therapy. And I'm asked about being beaten, and I describe it. I describe going into the headmaster's study and closing the door behind me, and I can smell the polish now. I can hear the clock ticking. And you get a quick interrogation, and then, right, put out your hand. And you don't know how many you're going to get. He didn't tell you in advance. You put out your hand, and then you get 3 or 6 on that. And then sometimes he'd say, put out your other hand, and sometimes you'd be sent on your way. And I remember the brass door handle, freezing cold brass door handle. You wanted to hold on to it forever because your hands were on fire. Your hands were burning. They were on fire. And by the time I got halfway down the corridor, would be embarked upon a really strenuous effort to convince myself that I was fine. No, don't cry. Whatever you do, don't cry. You're fine. It doesn't hurt. It's fine. And I'd done that for 35 years. And then my therapist just said to me, she said, well, that must have hurt. And I, immediately, like a reflex, like she'd hit my knee with a hammer, my initial reaction was to go, no, it did. And for some reason, in that context at that time, after 35 years of agreeing, no, it didn't hurt at all. I just said, yeah, it did. It really, really, really did. It really hurt. God, it hurt. And she did this thing that if you've never had therapy and you have no experience of it, you will find this as ridiculous as I would have done when I was sitting where you're sitting now. And she said, all right, tell him. And I said, what do you mean tell him? She said, tell 10, 11-year-old you that he's safe now, that he's all right, and that you are going to look after him, look after little you, look after your inner child, if you like. And I mean, as I said, it's a life-changing experience for me that I give thanks for every day. But that, to me, is boarding school syndrome. It's 35 years convinced that being regularly physically abused didn't hurt, and the emotional abuse as well, convincing yourself, because you can't go home and bury your head in your mum's hair. You have to get up, and that we still value that, right? Remember when Boris Johnson got COVID and David Cameron said, well, I've seen him play tennis, he's going to be absolutely fine. Come on, Charlie hockey sticks, it's only pain, it doesn't really hurt. That attitude is still rewarded in our society. So research into whether it's made people depressed or anxious or traumatized is not really very helpful. The research into how we have created a country where people like Boris Johnson and David Cameron can reign over us without recognising that an awful lot of their failings and flaws are a consequence of their backgrounds and schoolings. I just think it's really interesting. I might be talking absolute gibberish, but would you like to hear the quote that I'm referring to? Because it's an absolute classic. Were I to deduce any system from my feelings on leaving Eton, it might be called the theory of permanent adolescence. It is the theory that the experiences undergone by boys at the great public schools, their glories and disappointments, are so intense as to dominate their lives and to arrest their development. You see? From these it results that the greater part of the ruling class remains adolescent, school-minded, self-conscious, cowardly, sentimental. Now, I don't agree with the next bit. And in the last analysis, homosexual. I think the world has turned a little bit since then. But those lines there, have a look at the Conservative cabinet, particularly from 2010 onwards. Adolescent, school-minded, self-conscious, cowardly, sentimental. And then tell me that boarding school doesn't do you any harm. 22 minutes after 12 is the time. The sentencing comments due to begin in the case of Lucy Letby a little earlier than scheduled. We're expecting them at about 12:30. Tom Dunn has been at Manchester Crown Court all morning, where Lucy Letby is to be sentenced, as I say. Just talk us through the timetable, would you, Tom?
Well, James, we started this morning at 10 o'clock where there was defence submissions and prosecution submissions before we got onto the victim impact statements of 9 families. Of course, Lucy Letby has been found guilty of murdering 7 premature children and attempting to murder 6 others. This was during her time working on the neonatal unit at the Countess of Chester Hospital between June 2015 and June 2016. Highly emotive in court and very momentous for many of these families, who many of them are actually sat in the public gallery here today, but a lot of them weren't able to stand up and read their own impact statements, so many of them were read by the prosecution. Child A was murdered by Lucy Letby. That was the one we started with. The prosecution read out that Lucy Letby says 2015 was going to be, this is the mother of child A, going to be the best year of their lives, and everything was perfect with the babies, doing well in the neonatal unit. She went on to say, we never got to hold child A, as you, Lucy Letby, took him away. What should have been the happiest time of our lives became the worst nightmare. Child C was then read out to the court, the mother of child C, in person in court, starting off by saying, my tiny, feisty boy, the firstborn, my son. I blamed myself entirely for his death and still blame myself for not protecting him. 8 years have now passed and our grief is just as heavy with every day that goes on. We went for about an hour and a half reading these impact statements to the court. The final ones were read via a pre-recorded video message by child O and P's mother and father. Now, those are 2 of 3 triplets that were murdered by Lucy Letby within the space of 24 hours of each other. The pre-recorded video statement played to the court first by the mother of child O and P. She said it was a traumatic experience having to think what should be written on the gravestones of her 2 children. She said returning to the hospital when another family member was admitted gave her flashbacks. She also said she had a further child in 2017, a year after those 2 children died, and the parents had point-blank refused to have their baby cared for at the Countess of Chester Hospital. The father, in the final statement, said, "I found it difficult to talk about what happened. I could not grieve properly and have become cocooned and insular. Lucy Letby has destroyed our lives." Now, Lucy Letby herself is not present in court today. Neither was she on Friday when the final verdicts were handed down. Her parents, neither here either. And it sounds as though when we begin in a couple of minutes' time for those sentencing remarks, she won't be in the dock either to face her fate. As you said earlier, James, I heard you saying about how some people have described Lucy Letby as English Rose. Whether that's a fact or not, one fact does remain: she is Britain's most prolific baby killer.
Tom, very harrowing stuff. Thank you, and take care as you hear that sentencing due to unfold in the next few minutes. Although unlikely, it would seem that Lucy Letby will be in the dock yourself. Tom Dunn there, live for LBC from Manchester Crown Court. 26 minutes after 12 is the time. Parents. Roald Dahl wrote about his years at boarding school as a time of violence and cruelty. So did George Orwell, and so on a rather less important scale did your humble correspondent. But a new book suggests that it's not that bad at all. I just wonder whether or not your experiences tally with that conclusion. Elizabeth is in Uxbridge. Elizabeth, what would you like to say?
Oh, good afternoon, James. I'd like to say, first of all, thank you very much for normalising going and getting counselling. I think more people need to do that, so thank you very much for that.
My pleasure entirely.
I just wanted to say that both my parents went to private schools, and they sent my brother and I to private schools. My father, however, was a boarder, and the rest of us were day girls or day boys, but it deeply affected my father. So he started at prep school at the age of 10, and on his first day at school, he was caned. Now, he'd been caned for using the parallel bars in the gymnasium, and he hadn't realised that he wasn't supposed to be in the gymnasium. Obviously, he was 10. He was away from home for the first time, and he probably thought it was a bit of an adventure to go and use some parallel bars. And the consequence was getting caned. And he reminded us of that frequently. So it clearly had impacted him quite a lot. And my mother was adamant that whilst my brother and I should receive the quality of education that she and my father had received, she didn't want children to be sent away. She said children are not to be sent away. And particularly for me as a girl, she said, I don't want you having your first period when you're out in a boarding school. That should be something that should happen at home.
Gosh.
So that, I can be there for you. But one of the things I remember my father when I was 13, going off to school. And I went to a school that had both day girls and boarders.
Yes.
And I remember my father giving me loads of chocolate bars and saying to me, give them to the boarders because they will want them. They'll be away from home. They won't have these kind of, they won't have these kind of comforts. So even, 40 years after his experiences in the boarding house, he was still trying to make it better for other kids that he hadn't had someone to make it better for him. And
of course, yes, and that self-care as well is where it comes from as well. That not being very good at self-care. I don't know if that applies to your dad, but that need still to sort of address decades-old absences and vacancies. Elizabeth, thank you. Your mum got it right, I think, in my view, but it's all tied up in so many different things, so many different issues. And for my generation of people sent away to school, particularly from less privileged, middle class, but not proper posh backgrounds, it was a very rare opportunity to gain access to the sort of corridors that would otherwise be populated exclusively by the aristocracy and their attendants. It's coming up to 12:30. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. This is very strong from Barbara, who's in Havant. She says, the effect of being taught not to recognise that you are being mistreated and are in pain is to not recognise other people's pain. This is very dangerous and has been used to explain both individual psychopathy, see the work of child psychologist Alice Miller, and sociopathy. See Reich, The Mass Psychology of Fascism. I genuinely believe, I mean, I wouldn't necessarily reach for fascism or for psychopathy, but I think when you look at austerity, I don't think the austerity programme could have been brought in by politicians that hadn't been sent away to school and hadn't learnt to ignore their own pain lost the ability to recognise other people's. I think some of the stuff Rishi Sunak says as well speaks of that lesson of not recognising that you're being mistreated and are in pain. I could be wrong, but there's quite a lot of evidence on my side. Amelia Cox is here now with your headlines. It's 33 minutes after 12. We are keeping an eye and indeed an ear on Manchester Crown Court, where the sentencing of Lucy Letby is due to unfold, and we will take a view on whether or not to in fact, we will now cross live to Manchester Crown Court.
She is provided with a transcript of my remarks and copies of the victim personal statements read to the court. Lucy Letby, over a period of almost 13 months between June 2015 and June 2016, when in your mid-20s and employed as a neonatal nurse in the Countess of Chester Hospital in Chester, with specialist training in intensive care, you murdered 7 babies and attempted to murder 6 others. In the case of one of them, trying on separate occasions 2 weeks apart to murder her. You are now to be sentenced for your crimes. I order payment of the statutory surcharge in the appropriate amount. You acted in a way that was completely contrary to the normal human instincts of nurturing and caring for babies, and in gross breach of the trust that all citizens place in those who work in the medical and caring professions. The babies you harmed were born prematurely, and some were at risk of not surviving. But in each case, you deliberately harmed them, intending to kill them. In your evidence, you said that hurting a baby is completely against everything that being a nurse is, as indeed it should be. You also claimed you never did anything that was meant to hurt a baby, and only ever did your best to care for them. That was but one of the many lies you were found to have told in this case. There is no doubt that you are intelligent and outwardly were a very conscientious, hard-working, knowledgeable, confident and professional nurse, which enabled you repeatedly to harm babies on the unit without arousing suspicion for some time. You prided yourself in your competence. Your fellow neonatal nurses spoke very highly of you, and several of them became your close friends. Having started as a Band 5 nurse at the Countess of Chester in 2012, you became a mentor to student nurses, and in the spring of 2015 gained the qualification that enabled you to care for the sickest babies on the unit or those requiring the most intensive care. You relished being in the intensive care nursery. Your messages to colleagues revealed an interest in babies that were on or were coming to the unit who had uncommon medical conditions. The methods you employed to carry out your murderous intent were only revealed by the later detailed investigation into the events of and surrounding the collapses and deaths of the babies, which commenced in 2018. There was premeditation, calculation, and cunning in your actions. You specifically targeted twins and latterly triplets. Some babies were healthy, others had medical issues of which you were aware. The great majority of your victims suffered acute pain as a result of what you did to them. They all fought for survival. Some, sadly, struggled in vain and died. You used a number of different ways to try to kill them, thereby misleading clinicians into believing the collapses had or might have had a natural cause or were a consequence of a developing medical condition. You took opportunities to harm babies when staff were in breaks or away from babies. On some occasions, you falsified records to indicate there were signs of a deterioration before a collapse occurred. You knew that the last thing anyone working in the unit would or did think was that someone caring for the babies was deliberately harming them. As the number of unexpected and unexplained collapses and deaths escalated, senior doctors started to think the unthinkable and consider the possibility that someone was, in fact, deliberately harming the babies, and you were identified as the common factor. You had a detached enthusiasm for the resuscitations and what followed. You endeavoured to impress colleagues and clinicians and sought reassurance from them as to your competence and skills, and would message others to the effect that no one was at fault. On occasions, you cruelly and callously made inappropriate remarks to some of the grieving parents at the time of or in the immediate aftermath of a death. When the homes of both you and your parents were searched, confidential documents relating to babies, including handover and resuscitation sheets and notes and blood gas readings, were found, and there were entries in a diary recording relevant events. Handover sheets relating to all but the first 4 of the babies had been taken from the unit and kept by you. I am satisfied you started to keep these documents after those initial offences in June 2015 as morbid records of the dreadful events surrounding the collapses of your victims and what you had done to them. You had a fascination with the babies and their families, which extended to making repeated searches on Facebook for their parents, sometimes immediately following the events, and on occasions much later. A piece of paper with dense writing on both sides, setting out your thoughts and feelings, was found in the first search of your home in 2018. Amongst the phrases you wrote were, "The world is better off without me," and "I am evil, I did this." The impact of your crimes has been immense, as disclosed by the deeply moving personal statements that have been read to the court this morning. The lives of newborn or relatively newborn babies were ended almost as soon as they began, and lifelong harm has been caused, all in horrific circumstances. Loving parents have been robbed of their cherished children, and others have to live with the physical and mental consequences of your actions. Siblings have been deprived of brothers and sisters. You have caused deep psychological trauma, brought enduring grief and feelings of guilt, caused strains in relationships, and disruption to the lives of all the families of all your victims. It is no part of my function to reach conclusions as to the underlying reason or reasons for your actions, nor could I, for they are known only to you. I must pass appropriate sentences according to law, addressing the seriousness of your offences.
"12:42 is the time you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I think that was more a technical issue than an editorial one, but we may restore contact with Manchester Crown Court shortly. As you heard, the sentencing comments drawing on some remarkable aspects of this horrible case, not least that document found in her house, detailing feelings, if you like, about what she'd done, and talking to Tom Dunn earlier as well about the impact statements read out by the families. I don't know whether you found those a little bit difficult to bear, but I certainly did. Let's return now to Manchester Crown Court. I do apologise. We're having terrible time with the feed down from Manchester. It's just glitching in and out of contact. I am minded personally to try to restore that contact rather than pressing on with other matters, because as Lord Justice Goss delivered those remarks, you found yourself recognising both the scale of the investigation and the full horror of the crimes committed. But if you're just joining us, we are trying to listen to the sentencing comments coming from Manchester Crown Court. I don't think it's just us actually that have lost the link. I think there must be something wrong at the other end of the feed. But I'll keep you up to date with whether or not we are able to restore that contact imminently. The time now is 12:43. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I think we'll take a little break and hopefully come back shortly. 12:46 is the time. You can't trust a word I say. It was neither technical nor editorial reasons, but legal reasons that explain why our live feed from Manchester Crown Court came down. I think anonymity orders, and the judge can say things in court that are not for wider broadcast or wider reporting. So I think we'll wait until it's concluded, and when Sheila is with you a little later, you can go over the detail of what's been said, because we've got no way of knowing when the judge is about to veer into territory that is covered by reporting restrictions. I've never had that before in all the years I've been doing this, a sort of live reporting restrictions kicking in while we're still on air. But it means that we can at least take one or two of the calls that have been queuing up to discuss so-called boarding school syndrome. Just to reset the conversation, I think I'll read a couple of texts first, and then we'll go to Jen and Sarah. This one really caught me, actually. This one really resonated with me. Let me read it to you now. Thank you so much for addressing this topic. It's so valuable to bring the pain and trauma that I've seen a boarding school boy out into the open. I didn't go to one, but I had a relationship with someone who did. I had no idea how damaging his boarding school years were, or that they had destroyed this lovely young boy to such an extent that he cannot form trusting, loving relationships. He's mostly unaware of how damaged he is. It was only when I heard you talking about boarding school syndrome on a previous programme that I looked into it more deeply, and the penny dropped about how he was and what I was up against. The first step is to change awareness, without which, being in a relationship with someone so damaged, that's no hope of change. It's an abusive relationship, and in the end you need to save yourself. It's so desperately sad and such a waste of life, because he has such a deep void of loneliness that can never be filled. Well, it can be. I think probably that text got a bit cut off halfway through. I think it can be filled, but my goodness me, it takes a little bit of work and an awful lot of luck. 12:48 is the time. Let's go to Jen, who's in Redditch. Jen, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
Sorry, I'm actually quite upset, obviously, listening to that horrifying news from the court. My eldest son, Alexander, would have been 30 this year, and he died of alleged medical negligence. And, this is completely different to what I was going to say.
Hey, that way you'd say whatever you want to say. If that's where you are at the moment, then that's where we'll go, Jan. That must have been horrible for you, bringing back a lot of memories.
He died of medical negligence. He wasn't murdered.
I'm sorry.
I cannot imagine how those parents must be feeling right now. It must be awful, because obviously I've had 30 years of grief that I still carry around with me.
Of course.
And I just wanted to pay tribute to my own son, Alex Murray, who would have been 30 on the 27th of March this year. and now I'll try and pull myself together. And
Hey, well, you don't have to. If you want me to...
No, I'm fine.
Are you
Honestly,
sure?
I'm fine. It
All
was
right.
30 years ago.
Well, yeah, I know, but still
very pertinent, isn't it, really?
Of course it is, yeah. Bless you.
Yeah, so I was ringing to tell you about my former husband, who went to a Catholic boarding school not far from Kidderminster.
It wasn't one of mine, was it?
It wasn't yours, no.
Oh, that's a
wasn't
relief.
up north.
Okay. No, I went to one near Kidderminster as well before I went up north.
No, this one was in Droitwich.
Right, you are. I know which one it was. It's not there. It's not.
Exist
It's not
anymore.
there anymore, is it? Go on. There we
The
go.
church is still there.
Yes.
Actually, not the school. Yeah. Yeah, so, my husband went there as a boarder. And he used to be picked up at school days by his father from the train station and driven home. And without fail, every time he went home, his mother was in bed ill, in inverted commas.
Right.
So that was the warm welcome he received from his own mother. So he was at boarding school pretty much from the age of 7 onwards.
Yes.
He went to university, graduated as a teacher, went back to the school I was talking about, actually be a teacher. At that point, his father retired from the RAF.
Right.
Daily Mail readers, and moved to Droitwich, and my ex-husband chose to still...
Oh, we've got a really bad phone line, Jen. I'm losing you a bit now, which is not fair at all. Let me see if we can improve that at all, and then we'll get to the end of the story. Sarah's in Yorkshire. Sarah, what made you pick up the phone?
Oh, hello, James.
Hello,
Thank
Sarah.
you.
You're very welcome.
James, I've been listening to you for absolute donkeys.
Yeah, I know. It's getting a bit daft now, isn't it? It's been. I still feel like the fresh-faced new boy sometimes when I see Ferrari in the mornings, but I think that ship has sailed.
Oh, bless you. No, the reason I was calling was because my brother went to a boarding school that you're very familiar with.
Is it in Yorkshire?
Yeah.
Okay. So
Well, he's not in York. He's not in Yorkshire now. He's living in London.
No, the school still is, though, I think.
the
Unless
school is
we've
very
discovered
much
some
still-
amazing powers of physics as yet undreamt of. Yeah, go on.
No. It's still there, and there's one or two of the original fathers still present because he's quite friendly with one of them.
Okay.
But anyway, cut a long story short, there's 10 years difference between my brother and I.
Right.
And consequently, when I was 18, I went to Leeds University, and my brother originally went to a boarding school in London.
Yes.
And then, because of work situations with my parents, the decision was made to send him to Yorkshire so that I could effectively bunny hop across from Leeds over to the school.
Oh, so you could keep an eye on him?
Maybe. Potentially, yeah. But
Okay.
at the age of 18, it was the last thing I really wanted to do. But hey,
Also,
that was another story.
there wouldn't be a great deal that you could do. You wouldn't be allowed onto the premises most of the time.
No, absolutely. I mean, all I was able to do was go and see him maybe on a Saturday if he wasn't playing rugby, or potentially do his washing or take some sweeties or whatever it was. Once I managed to pass my driving test. But anyway, but the reason I was calling was that because of the big age difference, we weren't particularly close.
Sure.
But what I did note at school was as he progressed, because he was there till he completed at 18 or so.
Yes.
As he progressed and things were happening with some of the smaller boys,
yes,
he started to. He was a bit of a listening ear for some of the smaller boys.
Okay.
And which was very kind of him. But he also started to bully some of the other boys as well.
Okay.
And he used to. There were magazines that used to go around. I don't know if you were familiar with any of this. There were some of the, the pornographic magazines that were going around to some of the juniors and such, and cigarettes and things like this that they weren't supposed to have in the dorms.
No comment.
And and my brother was he was sort of like a dorm prefect.
Okay.
And so he would be taking these off the boys and then effectively
That was
sending them
relatively
back.
commonplace. I don't think that necessarily marks him out but I mean with the way we talk about it as if it's normal, it's actually very weird when if you know nothing about this world. It doesn't
I know. Well, I was horrified when I first found out about it.
Yes, you would be.
But anyway, so I just want to fast forward a bit because there's 10 years difference between us. I'm 56. He's now 46.
Okay.
And since he left and started his working career in London, he's had several relationships with females.
Yes.
But none of them have ever been of any substance.
No, I hear this quite a lot, actually.
Yeah, it's very odd. But the main reason I'm calling is because I'm very concerned about his current relationship.
Okay.
And I can only interfere so far.
Of course.
But this individual that he's with shows absolutely no love towards him in my interpretation of it. She's very much more sort of like, she'll actually say to him, I love you as a brother, and that's about as far as it goes. Yet my brother's attitude is he feels a need to always do what's right.
Yes.
He's got this real sort of connection with right and wrong, and it's to the point now that he will sacrifice his own happiness
rather than feel any guilt. Rather than feel any guilt later.
Especially, I mean, they've bought a house together. They've been together about 5 years now, and I was super reluctant when I understood that the mortgage was in both names and all this kind of stuff. But she's got 2 small children from a previous relationship, and as far as my brother's concerned, he's doing the right thing.
Well, I mean, I understand where you're coming from, and I think I, up to a point, understand where he's coming from. Is he happy?
No.
Definitely not?
He is. Are
you sure? We're all different. So, go on.
I think he's got to a point where he's accepting the situation.
This is as good as it gets for him in his mind.
Yeah, effectively.
Oh, that's sad.
But he's very good. He's very good at protecting himself. I think another caller said something, or perhaps it was a text that you'd read, I can't quite remember, where it's almost like he shields himself.
Oh no, that's me. That's the survival personality. Yeah, that's absolutely the suit of armour. That mine worked in the opposite direction. I think to his, in that it led me into slightly sort of irresponsible behaviours. But you are constantly persuading yourself that you are not suffering at all. You're not in pain at all. This is all perfectly normal. This is all splendid. I'm very happy, and it seems like he's got that thing going on from what you're saying.
He's quite a tough cookie to crack, if I'm really honest with you, because it's only been in the last few years that he and I have developed a brother-sisterly relationship, and that, I'll be honest with you, has come on the back of the death of our mother.
Right.
Because he was super, super close to my mum, and I've always been closer to my father, for whom I still care for. And yet the relationship between him and my father is non-existent. There's always been a bit of an alpha male thing there, but I think there was an element of reluctance. There was definitely reluctance on my brother's part to go to boarding school. It's very much something my father did.
It gets buried deep, that though, and it never goes away, I don't think. And also, you're not allowed to admit that you'd rather not be there. That's one of the maddest things, Sarah. I don't know if he's ever managed to communicate that to you, but part of that, what you're talking about, that self-protection, you can never admit that you don't want to be there. So everyone's parents say to them, if you don't like it, you can come home at half-term, or so. Well, most parents do, or some parents do, but you never could do that. The shame would be unbearable, and the sense of failure would be unbearable. I'm sorry for that. I'm glad you've got a better relationship than you used to have, though. I mean, that's the win, isn't it? But your fears, of course, about his actual relationship are on the other side of the scales. I wish I had a bit more time, sorry. It's coming up to 12:58. I've covered a lot in today's show, and I don't have time, sadly, to speak to anybody else. So my apologies to Sally and to Jill and to Roy, and some callers who didn't have links, I think, to the schools or the part of the country where I grew up. That is pretty much it for today. If you did miss any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on Global Player, where you can rewind live radio or enjoy the whole show podcast. You'll also find all of LBC's shows there, as well as also help you stay up to date with all the latest news from LBC and a dizzying array of podcasts, including a rather splendid episode of Full Disclosure this week featuring Polly Toynbee, who one of the most interesting interviewees I've done, I think. And we've got a cracker for you this week as well. I've got 2 or 3 on the horizon that you're going to really enjoy. So do rewind live radio on Global Player. You can download it for free, from your app store, or head to globalplayer.com. We've got a bit of a shuffle going on. I don't know if you've noticed. Tom Swarbrick's in for Nick Ferrari this week, which means that Ben Kentish is in for Tom Swarbrick, and it means that Sheila Fogarty is in for Sheila Fogarty.
Stability. I'm providing the
consistency.
As are you, husband.
Indeed, always.
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 You,